Welcome to Oysters with a Pearl, the podcast series presenting the key outcomes of the eMSP NBSR project. My name's Kira G. I'm an MSP expert working at the Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency in Germany, and I'm delighted to be a host for this series. The EU-funded eMSP NBSR project brought together MSP planners, experts and stakeholders from the North Sea and Baltic Sea regions to collaboratively advance MSP practice. Urgent emerging topics were considered in communities of practice, and a series of practical recommendations were developed. Today we are talking about climate change and MSP. I'm joined by Riku Varjopuro from the Finnish Environment Institute, who led the work on climate change within the eMSP project. Hi Riku, nice to have you.
Hello, it's nice to be here with you.
Thank you. So let me start by asking you a pretty basic question, which is why should MSP be concerned with climate change at this stage when there are still so many unknowns surrounding climate change and how it might impact the ocean?
Well, I would say it's exactly the unknowns, the uncertainties, why MSP has to be concerned with the climate change. What we know now is that the climate change is already having its impacts. And we also know that climate change can cause very severe impacts in the oceans. Well, surely we don't know exactly when the climate change impacts will be realized and how in particular locations or planning areas. But that cannot be an excuse for overlooking it. In my opinion, overlooking climate change in MSP simply is not an option. And then again, why wouldn't we be proactive with MSP when we know that MSP already is forward-looking planning framework? And this makes it quite ready to address climate change in MSP. And MSP, we know that MSP can help in implementing many measures to reduce emissions or to capture and store carbon, and also strengthen our knowledge and capabilities to adapt to climate change. And I think so there's plenty of reasons why MSP should and must be concerned with the climate change.
Very good points. I mean, absolutely. MSP is an anticipatory instrument, isn't it? It's forward-looking and it's also adaptive at its heart. So very good question. Why shouldn't it? Currently, there's actually a lot of talk about something called climate smart MSP. So what exactly would you say makes MSP climate smart, and how is that different from MSP that we know, from the MSP that's already being practiced?
I don't think that it's necessarily that revolutionary. As I pointed out earlier, MSP is already forward-looking and its adaptive planning framework. But then what climate smartness would add to MSP is to give more emphasis to a new driver that is changing trends in marine ecosystems and maritime sectors. And this needs to be factored into MSP scenarios and visions, and of course into planning decisions, if we know how to do that. And then I would also say that it needs to be factored into the monitoring and evaluation to ensure that MSP remains relevant in cases of rapid changes and that MSP remains adaptive. I think that monitoring and evaluation is key to that. But then uncertainties related to climate change that you raised in the beginning are, of course, a complicated matter. I would think that most likely an idea of making a plan for a 6 to 10 year period and then revising it might not work in the future anymore. So we need to think of more anticipatory and adaptive ways of planning. And we have some examples of that, for instance, from Sweden and Finland, where the governments have asked a rather quick update of the plan soon after it was adopted. And the reason in both cases was that there's a need to find a lot of new areas for offshore wind to combat climate change through MSP. But then this rapid deployment of new offshore wind, even if we understand the need of it very well, but may lead to less smart planning. And this is something that we need to be cautious with, that the rapidness should not be achieved at the expense of thoroughness or at the expense of not caring about principle of science and evidence-based planning. And then in our eMSP project policy brief on climate smart MSP that we published, we link climate smartness very strongly to ecosystem-based approach to MSP. You can't have one without the other. Climate smartness sometimes is understood simply as building lots of offshore renewable energy installations and then giving less attention to marine ecosystem health. But in the spirit of our policy brief, that is not climate smart. It's just building lots of offshore renewables. So yes, climate smart, it adds certain elements into MSP, but it also has to be understood as a kind of a holistic approach, not just, for instance, building lots of wind parks.
That is such an important point, I think, and very good of you to raise it, to say that, just simply focusing on one aspect related to climate change mitigation does not make the smart MSP necessarily. Smart is really the broader picture, the more holistic approach that MSP is actually known for anyway, isn't it? Countries are already doing something, obviously, to take account of climate change, but I want to come back to the eMSP experience a little bit more and ask you, what would you say are countries already actually doing quite well when it comes to incorporating climate concerns into their MSP? And where do we still find gaps or challenges?
Well, I think that the countries are rather climate mitigation ready when considering that they are already planning for offshore renewable energy areas, which is a good thing, of course. And then what could be added in terms of climate mitigation would be to model and calculate carbon footprint of planning decisions. And then, of course, we don't explicitly mention carbon handprint idea, that is to have climate positive solutions, but this is also included in some of our recommendations, for instance, when it comes to carbon capture and storage. The major gaps are on the climate adaptation side. I would say that, well, of course, protection against coastal erosion, that's quite well addressed. But we know that climate change is progressing. Well, basically, no matter what we do or fail to do, it is progressing, and this is something that we need to take seriously. Unfortunately, the future generations will more likely be worse off than we are. And this should be factored into all our policies and planning frameworks, including MSP, to try and minimize the losses to the future generation. I think this is definitely something that needs to be emphasized more.
Yes, that isn't exactly happy news, but I think very necessary. And again, coming back to the role of MSP as an anticipatory tool, and do our best to actually be ready for that sort of future. In terms of practical things, in terms of practical recommendations, what would you say are some of the immediate things, perhaps, or immediate steps that planners, let's go for those first, can take to make MSP more climate smart in those next rounds of planning? And then what do you think needs to be done at the policy level also to support the work of planners?
Yes, our recommendation in the policy brief, we have there 44 of them. Some are directed to policymakers, some are to planners, and several of them are for knowledge providers, for scientists and other knowledge providers. But when we think of immediate practical things that planners can do, I would say that, talk to climate scientists, talk to oceanographers, talk to economists, and talk to social scientists and engineers to gather knowledge on where are we with the climate change and where we are most likely going to, and what we can do about it. But more than that, I think that we need to create platforms and processes for different sectors of administration and sector representatives and civil society organizations, NGOs, to discuss and also to debate and to create common understanding of the situation and discuss and debate of the options and measures and try to ensure the implementation. I think that we need to find who will do what. MSP can do a lot, but a lot needs to be done through other processes that are better designed for certain types of measures and actions. In our policy brief, we also underline the need to create an umbrella of climate smart ocean governance to cover all sectors and all relevant policy and planning processes. And only then we can practice climate smart MSP effectively.
Yeah, so MSP can't do it alone. It can do a lot, but it can't really do it without the support of other policies at different levels. Understood completely. Yeah. I mean, climate change is such a big topic, and it's easy to get a bit disheartened because it seems so intractable. But there's lots of recommendations and practical things from what you were saying that can actually be tackled right now. So let's end on a somewhat hopeful note. And I want to ask you, based on the experiences of the eMSP project, what is it that makes you hopeful that the next generation MSP plans are in fact going to be more climate smart?
Yeah, I think that the discussions within eMSP project and the results we got on climate smart MSP clearly shows that the MSP community is willing and able to deal with climate change. The recommendations that we have in the policy brief are, by the way, mostly such that are either already practiced in the countries. Some actions may be done in only one country, but actually many are already done in several of the countries. And there are also recommendations of the actions that countries are committed to do in the future, in the next planning round. So that's very optimistic. And we also identified multiple research tasks that MSP authorities found important for them to create more and new solutions. So a lot is already happening, and I think that it's clearly acknowledged among the MSP community the need to go climate smart, and that makes me optimistic.
That sounds really, really hopeful. Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear that the MSP community at least is ready to be climate smart, I guess. And yeah, good to hear also that a lot can be done by collaborating more with scientists, for example, social scientists, natural scientists, and just by coming together as stakeholders, as a community around this topic of climate smart MSP. Thanks, Riku. Thank you very much for giving us the ins and outs of climate change and MSP from the eMSP perspective. And thanks everyone for joining us today. If you'd like to find out more, check out the eMSP website on www.emsp.project.eu, all in one word, to download the policy briefs and reports, including the one on climate change. And don't forget to tune in for the other episodes of Oysters with a Pearl, which are also available on the website.